ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for coming this evening and joining us for our briefing on what's the point of the deanery. Tonight is lovely that actually Bex and Tug are going to a part of our team are going to lead us this evening. So that which is really nice. And you'll see those of us who've got our National Deaners Network behind us, a part of the group, and so is Joyce also. She's part of our group. So it's lovely to have you this evening. There will be a chance during the evening for you for a break, coffee break, when Tug finishes first half, and then Bex will take over second half. If at any point you've got any questions technical, then Tim is our expert. And if Tim doesn't sort it out, he'll then pass to Alistair. And then if Alistair doesn't sort it out, we'll all just cry in the corner because there's no hope for any of us. So there we are. We'll be fine this evening. So to do that. Okay, thank you. So I'll be quiet and let's first of all be still, if we may, as we open with a prayer. Choose the collect which we had on Sunday. Heavenly Father, whose blessed Son was revealed to destroy the works of the devil and to make us the children of God and heirs of eternal life. Grant that we, having this hope, may purify ourselves even as he is pure, that when he shall appear in power and great glory, we may be made like him in his eternal and glorious kingdom, where he is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Doug, thank you very much indeed. Over to you. We're in your hands for the next part. Thank you.
It's one of the mysteries that continues to baffle me, I'm afraid. Having survived several attempts to snuff it out or to dilute its effectiveness, the deanery has pulled through and come out on the other side, in some areas strong, with a pivotal role in the overall mission and ministry of the church. So how come it survived, and what's the point of the deanery? Before we get into some of the nitty-gritty of this, let's have a quick look at the deanery backstory. Deaneries have been around for some centuries, and they've played a key role in the mission and ministry of the church. And in 1968-69, there was a synodical government measure. It was to review the whole structure of the church. Now, I don't recall that much about that because in 1968-69, I was just getting married and I had better things on my mind to think about than the governance of the Church of England, I'm afraid. But it was an attempt to streamline the way the Church of England was governed and operated. The synodical, I have problems with this one, the synodical government measure replaced the National Assembly of the Church of England and established the structures that we've got now. That's General Synod and Archbishop's Council, and then right down through diocese, deanery, etc. Now, it operated with a degree of success for around 25 years when Lord Bridge was asked to review the structures and to recommend how it could be more effective. And the Bridge Report, that may ring a bell with some folk, the Bridge Report was published in 1996. It had some good things to say about deaneries, but there was a sting in the tail, which recommended that the deanery should be removed from the synodical government structure. And this unleashed a huge backlash. The deanery community swung into action, and eventually the recommendation was removed and the deanery continued in the structure. Now, in 2003, the mission-shaped church identified the deanery as having a key role in mission and ministry across parish boundaries, and it awarded a degree of a seal of approval to the deanery. Then if we fast forward to 2008, there is a revision of the church representation rules, which caused a lot of rumblings in the deanery community, and I'll come onto that a little bit later on. So first of all, what is a synod? It would help if we actually understood this. Now, the word synod comes from the Greek synodos, meaning assembly or meeting. The actual meaning of the word synod is a joining together. It comes from two Greek words, syn and hodos, meaning with and on the road. Thus, we get the sense of our deanery community, synod, travelling together upon the same road in conversation and discussion. Originally, synods were meetings of bishops, and the word in that sense still applies in Catholicism and in the Eastern Orthodoxy. It's a long-established practice in the church to use this term for meetings held every now and then where members of the church come together to review things and make decisions. But let's get on to why a deanery. In order to understand that, let's have a look at what is a deanery. Now, there's a very famous quote, and for the life of me, I don't know where it came from, but it's been around a long time. It says, when asked what the definition of a deanery synod was, someone said, a group of Anglicans waiting to go home. Now, it may well be that you've been to deanery synod meetings, which are a bit like that. Hopefully, in your deaneries, they're a bit more adventurous and a bit more interesting. But what's the purpose of the deanery? Now, the synodical government measure, way back in 1969, said it's about bringing together the views of the parishes of the deanery on common issues and problems to discuss and formulate those policies and on those issues and problems, and then to foster a sense of community and interdependence among those parishes, and generally to promote the deanery, the whole mission of the church, pastoral, evangelistic, social, and ecumenical. So we've got quite a big brief there as a deanery, a lot that we can actually go at. But let's have a quick look at this Bridge report. He made some very helpful comments about the synodical structure and the deanery in particular. He said that the Church of England believes it's important to include all its members in the discernment of the Christian truth and of the government of the church. And the synodical government is an attempt to seek and find the mind of Christ for his church, as well as a consensus on the ordering of church life. But what he had to say about the deanery, well, he determined that there was much dissatisfaction with the existing system of the synodical government at deanery level. He recommended that the statutory requirement for deanery synods should be repealed. In other words, it should be got rid of. He went on to say, well, I should just pause there for a sec, because that's the bit that everybody picked up from the Bridge report. What he went on to say was that each diocese should be required to produce a scheme or schemes for deanery arrangements that will be approved by their diocese and synod. These would be subject to review every 5 years. He also said that the diocese determination of deanery arrangements should be strengthened by the repeal of the present provisions, that's the provisions at the time in the pastoral measure of 1983, which, if there was going to be any alterations to the way things were done, would require a pastoral scheme. As I say, what people picked up on was the fact that he recommended that the structure, the bit requiring a deanery synod, should be repealed. And they took that to mean that diocesans or deaneries should be removed completely. But they didn't go on to read the rest of it. But as we heard earlier, this proposal didn't go down too well. And after a lot of feed, it was actually removed, and the deanery survived, and it's still part of the synodical structure. If we then move forward a bit to the mission-shaped church, this is where we got a lot more recognition. The mission-shaped church recognised that there was a network of collaborating parishes, i.e. that the deanery could achieve more than the individual parishes on their own. Few parishes can survive on their own, it said, and none should have to. And once that need for a network approach is recognised, the deanery becomes an essential unit for mission. The role of the area or rural dean, lay chair and synod is central to the mission planning of the deanery. Going forward a bit further then to the next hiccup was the new church representation rules in 2008. These recommended in this revision that there will be some changes. Now, how it actually arrived in the church representation rules is a little bit of a mystery, because all of a sudden in the final drafting of the rule, it set the limit for lay people, the length of term that they could serve, to 2 terms. That's 6 years. Now, that meant that this was the only elected office or elected role in the Church of England where there were a limit on the length of term that somebody could serve. And there was lots of folk that were saying, well, This doesn't help in us recruiting and training and getting people geared up to be lay chair. They were saying that probably takes 3 years to get to understand a bit about how the whole system works. And it's not until the second term and then the third term that you really start to understand and can take an active role as a lay chair. So there was lots of concerns and disquiet at General Synod about this whole idea of limiting the terms to 2 terms, i.e. 6 years. Now, the upshot was that General Synod decided to ask the Electoral Reform Group, the ERG, to carry out a consultation and find out exactly what people felt in the deaneries, etc. Now, in some respects, I think they wish they hadn't have done that, because it was the largest ever response that they'd had to a consultation. It was nearly double the number of people responded that actually responded for the consultation on women bishops, for example. And it always baffles me as to how deaneries actually generate this feeling that they're under threat, and then they come together and they're going to fight against it. And this is what happened. So in 2020, new church representation rules were amended so that it removed the length of terms that people could serve, but it left it open for the annual parish meeting to decide if it wanted to impose a limit. That's a bit of background, but it does help, I think, for us to actually look at where the deanery fits in the whole structure of things, just to remind ourselves. Now, the parish at its annual parish meeting elects wardens, PCC members, and Deanery Synod reps. So the Deanery Synod now has representatives from the parishes, and all clergy that are licensed in the deanery are members of the deanery chapter or the House of Clergy at Deanery Synod. And then we have a House of Laity at Deanery Synod. Deanery Synod then elects the members of diocesan synod, and diocesan synod has a House of Bishops, House of Clergy, and a House of Laity. And then over at General Synod, where the members are elected by Deanery Synod, there is also a House of Bishops, House of Clergy, and a House of Laity. Now, these houses are important to us because when voting on items or motions that are discussed or debated, these houses have a real function. Generally speaking, most motions or most things which are voted on are done by a show of hands. There are occasions when there needs to be a count of synod, in which case it is just a straightforward count of all the people that are there that are eligible to vote. But there are occasions when there is a count by houses, and this is where it's used sometimes to defeat motions, etc., because it has to pass in all 3 houses. So often, as we had with, say, the vote on women bishops, for example, each vote somebody called for a vote by houses, and so there was a count of each house. And in some instances, it passed because all 3 houses voted for it, and in others, it didn't because one of the houses fell. It wasn't passed. So that's a bit about the sort of synodical structure. But how do you play the system? We work on the basis that we have some suggestions, ideas, concerns, which can start off at a parish level. These are formed into, generally speaking, into motions which can then be taken to the PCC meeting or to Deanery Synod or to diocesan synod. Each item that has when it's brought in, for example, if it's brought into the PCC, has to be passed and voted on so it can go forward to Deanery Synod, and then it has to pass in Deanery Synod to go through to diocesan synod, and then those things can then be referred to General Synod. General Synod is a legislative body primarily, although it discusses other issues which are of importance to us, both within our own national church and international, which affect us in the community, etc. There are other ways that we can get items onto these agendas. We can have private members' motions and questions can be asked. Let me say a little bit about private members' motions. A private member, that's any member of General Synod, can put down a motion which they'd like to have discussed. It's then open for people, other members of General Synod, to decide whether they want to support it. And once there are at least 100 members of General Synod supporting a private member's motion, it then becomes eligible to get onto the agenda. Now, there's been some really interesting motions over the years which have come through and started at parish level and gone through all these various levels. For example, in 2006, I recall, there was a private member's motion from a member of the Lichfield diocese on married couples tax allowance. And that started off by this person taking it to their PCC and say, I'm really quite concerned about this and I think we should do something about it. And it then was passed through to Deanery Synod. They discussed it and said, this is something we want to take forward. They went to Diocesan Synod, where they too said, yes, we'd like this to go through to General Synod. So that private members motion actually was debated and it passed without a single vote against it. I can't remember the actual numbers, but not a single vote against it. So there's been other ways, for example, things can get through where from Diocesan Synod, a motion can be sent to General Synod. These are always referred to as Diocesan Synod motions, and they get onto the agenda. Now, the difference between a private members motion and a Diocesan Synod motion is that the private members motion needs to have 100 people supporting it before it will get onto the agenda, whereas the Diocesan Synod motion is put onto the agenda at General Synod, generally in the order in which they arrive at General Synod. Now, I don't want to sort of pour a bit of a damp squid on this, but there's a queue of Diocesan Synod motions waiting to get onto the agenda. And at the moment, it takes about 4 to 5 years, unless it's something that gets short-circuited. It takes 4 to 5 years to get that onto General Synod. So it really does take a while, which is why often you'll find that somebody will get in touch with a member of General Synod and say, would you put this down as a private members motion? Because if it really is interesting and important, then you'll find that you'll get your 100 signatures and it'll get onto the agenda quicker that way. A Diocesan Synod motion, for example, in the Lichfield Diocese, I'm using Lichfield Diocese example, we had one that went through which was to do with religious persecution and the persecuted church. And that once again went through completely unopposed. So it does work. We've had individual motions that have come through from parishes. For example, there was one to do with the declaration that people make on their election, their nomination form for PCC wardens and Deanery Synod members, for example, a declaration about their criminal records. Now, originally, that got through to the Diocesan Synod and was forwarded to General Synod, but before it could get on to General Synod, a similar motion came up, which allowed one of our General Synod representatives to create an amendment, and that went through. So we got it through that way. So the various ways that we can actually get things done. An important part of General Synod and the way that we can actually get issues raised is through asking questions, rather like Prime Minister's question time, although it's not so combative as it is in the House down the road. Each General Synod member can ask up to 2 questions at each group of sessions. So if you've got something which you think would be of interest and needed to be raised and put on the radar of General Synod, getting your General Synod representative to ask a question is a way to do it. And finally, the other way of actually getting things done at General Synod is to write in. There are often, through the legislative process, various points where they ask for people to submit their comments and views and suggestions. If you keep your eye on when those are around and the closing dates for those, you could write in with your suggestions. So that's a little bit about playing the system. But coming back to the deanery. In 1990, after the Bridge Report, the National Deanery Conference there had around 120 delegates with representatives from 36 dioceses, if I remember right. And the title of the conference was "A Bridge Thus Far." This was a reference to the report on the synodical government review group, which was chaired by Lord Bridge. What was clear from our conference is that there was evidence that the deanery was working well. It was involved in mission, ecumenism. There was a lot of collaborative work but in the deaneries and lots of ministries which were developing across parish boundaries, and that the role of the rural dean and the lay chair was working well and was developing well. There was good spirituality in the deanery, and the deanery structure as it was working very well. The conclusion of the conference was that the deanery is alive and well. And I think 25 years on from that, the deanery is. What we're seeing across the country now is that more and more dioceses are seeing the deanery as a significant part of the structure of the church for mission and ministry, where it's easier sometimes for a deanery to work together to do something than it does within the individual parish, because there's resources which can be combined and work collaboratively across the deanery. So there's a bit of background for us to consider. And I'm going to pause for a minute because you may notice that my voice is a little bit croaky. And that's primarily because I've recently had some surgery on my voice and I need to have a drink. So any questions, please?
If you want to pop your questions into the chat bar, that would be fine. I'm keeping an eye on it now. Or you can put your hand up. I can see things up there, but I'm watching the chat bar very carefully. If you've got any questions you want to pop in there. How best practice is promulgated, Tug?
Yeah.
Is that one you want to pick up on?
Right. How is best practice
Promulgate.
I think it's through people like the National Deanery Network. We're always looking for things which are working well, which could be done by other deaneries. And we know from our experience, for example, when we've done our deanery briefings and particularly our conference, that what the delegates and people are interested in is practical things which they can take back and pick up and use in their deaneries. But other than that, there isn't really another body which brings together those ideas and best practices. Here's the advert from our sponsors, the National Deanery Network. Sign up so that you keep up to date.
So I think actually, Howard, just to say your voice a moment, we do normally trying to make sure that the Deanery briefing slides are available. I'm sure you'd be happy to sort those out, Tug, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that'll be
Yeah.
the.
Okay.
What's the history of the NDN in relation to the Bridge Report? Now, the NDN, the National Deanery Network, and its forerunner, which was the Church House Deaneries Group, has been around now, I should think, for the best part of 40 plus years. I'm trying to think back when it first started. It was called the Church House Deanery Group originally because a group of people got together and felt that there really ought to be something that supported deaneries, and they were looking for somewhere to meet. And somebody very kindly sorted out a meeting room at Church House in London for them. So they decided to call themselves the Church House Deanery Group. And I should think probably about 10 or 15 years ago now, we changed the name to the National Deanery Network because it was more appropriate to describe the sort of things which we were doing, etc. So yeah, it's been around. I think I've been with the National Deanery Network and the forerunner of the Church House Deanery Group for about 30 years. And I think I cut myself recently and, it came out purple. It came out deanery blood.
I thought you meant bishop like Episcopal. You said purple. There's a good question here from Catherine. If it takes so many years to get questions to join General Synod by a deanery, why would anyone bother using that route? That's a good question, Tug.
Good question. Questions are easier to get on. It's diocesan synod motions which take the time. Really speaking, General Synod meets twice a year in February and in July. And there's always a provision for another meeting in November, but often that November option isn't taken up because supposedly there isn't enough business to actually warrant bringing synod together for another, because it is quite expensive. But I think more and more now there's a feeling that we really do need to think seriously about this because of the backlog, particularly in diocesan synod motions. And there are other things which are coming forward into General Synod, which obviously will need time to be debated and discussed. It may well be that if we can encourage General Synod to use all the available dates which they set aside, we might see those waiting lists come down a bit. But it's right, it is quite off-putting. And I know in our diocese, when I've explained to people, yes, we can pass this and send it to General Synod, but it might be a few years before it comes up. And I have to say that the motion to do with the persecuted church was 4 years since our diocesan synod passed it and sent it to General Synod. And it took a whole team of us to sit down and go through everything to find out exactly what it was we agreed we'd send to General Synod. So, memory does lose, get a bit befuddled after a while.
Are you mentioning anything about amendments to Deanery Synod motions at all as part of what you're saying later?
You weren't, but if Alistair, you're welcome to please mention it now.
One of the reasons it's worth mentioning here is because sometimes when a Deanery Synod puts a motion forward, it can be topical at that moment. Somebody's just mentioned the need for being topical. And one of the problems can be when it takes a year or two to go through to the next stages, which sometimes does happen because there are other more urgent things being discussed at Synod. Then when its turn comes up, it's kind of lost its focus a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's one of the times when actually you can get some amendments put forward by either somebody from the same diocese or sometimes another diocese, somebody from another diocese will come along and say, we see what you're trying to do. There was something on modern slavery a while back. It was focused very locally on a particular deanery in a particular diocese. And yet actually the whole modern slavery issue had grown quite a lot in the intervening time. And actually, it was much more important to give it a completely national focus rather than a local diocesan focus. And so some conversations went on between two dioceses, and quite a strong change came through in an amendment to amend the main structures of that particular deanery motion as it originally came through. And what was eventually passed by Synod was much, much stronger. And able to be more topical because of that. So there are sometimes some good things in just sending them up from the grassroots, and it can come through in a positive way nonetheless.
And I think that it's worth, if you're in a deanery looking at a particular issue, is having a look on the General Synod, on the Church of England, the General Synod section, to see what diocesan synod motions are there, or talk to your diocesan synod reps and get them to have a look to see if there's other things which are similar, which, as you say, Alistair, could be amended. And that's exactly what happened with the motion that we sent to do with the declarations that people make to do with criminal backgrounds, criminal records, etc., on their nomination forms. It would have taken quite a while for that to have actually worked its way through. But there was a very similar thing coming through from one of the other dioceses, which we had discussions, as you say, had discussions with, and then put forward an amendment, and they were quite happy for that amendment to go through. So we actually got our bit of what we were looking to send to General Synod through much faster than if it had gone down the straightforward diocesan synod motion route. Okay, folks, I'm going to pause for a screen break. So what's the point of the deanery? Whilst we have that break, and if we take about, if we get back by 20 past, let's consider in the 25 years since the Bridge report recommended scrapping the deanery, what's changed? And in today's church, what's the point of the deanery? And we'll be having a look at some of the ways that might be important, but we're interested now. If you pause, consider that, and we'll be back at 20 past.
Okay, folks, it's a good time to go and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee if you want to. And the Tug said we no stop till 20 past, so you got 10 minutes there, so to go and find a drink and pop to the look forward to seeing you back at 20 past. Thanks, Doug, for the first half. That's very good. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. I think Tug said 20 past, so I will slowly crank my system up and prepare to get going again whilst trying not to get distracted by the amazing stuff in the chat. Oh, there's some really great stuff here, guys. Thank you for sharing. I don't know whether we can capture it in the chat at the end, but there are some really great ideas on here, and I'm particularly loving the synergy around beekeeping. That's awesome. I hope you guys get the chance in breakout groups in a little while to kind of to do some of this a little bit more personally rather than just in the chat. Okay, hopefully that means everyone can now see my screen. Is that working?
Yep, thank you.
Great.
Hold on back, thanks.
Lovely. So welcome back, everyone. After Tug's fabulous section on some of the history and some of the detail and some of the structures around deaneries, I'm afraid I'm about to get a little bit more pragmatic and a bit more practical and maybe arguably a bit more modern, I suppose, but definitely more practical. Back, everyone's got a cup of tea. I've got the same one. It's nearly cooled. So, deaneries. Thinking about deaneries and blazing a trail outside the jar. This video might freak you out a little bit. It's all about fleas, but I think it makes some really good points. I hope you'll enjoy it.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
So it's a little bit cheesy, but I think it makes a really interesting point about whether in deaneries we are somehow conditioned by the system. And is there something about that that has caused some of us in deaneries to slightly lose the will to live? Has the deanery been kept in the jar too long? And are there ways we can still successfully make a difference in deanery? In a little while, we're going to move into breakout groups. And hopefully you guys are going to have a bit of a conversation with each other about what you think makes a deanery work well or not well. And are just some of the things I thought it might be helpful to talk about to whet your appetite a little bit for conversation. So things to reflect on might be, how does the relationship between the diocese and the deanery impact on whether a deanery works well? Does it feel like communication is primarily one way, or does it feel like communication is genuinely going both ways? What about reflecting on how the diocese views the deanery, both as an abstract concept, as a thing, but also how you feel like you're interacting with as a group of people, real, actual people? Do you feel valued as a deanery, and how much is that shown, and how does that get shown? Is it tangible? Does it feel real? How much of a difference does the relationship, do you think, between your rural or area D actually make? Is it one of those things that you don't really notice when it's going well, but suddenly if there's a conflict or a miscommunication or something goes wrong and it gets quite complicated? Next, does having a vision and direction or a vision and purpose give your meetings a bit of pointfulness, a real sense of purpose? Does having something to do and deliver together maybe make a difference? In my deanery, the times that it's felt like we've been working more positively together is when we've been doing something constructive. For us, we've had lots of different examples of that, and I'll look at ideas in a little bit, but a picnic, a passion trail across churches, a summer lunch club for local children. In our experience, when we're doing things together, having a reason to talk, a reason to share, even a reason to meet, just makes everyone more enthusiastic and often increases the number of people we have actually turning out to the meeting. And finally, that light blue box, the issue that might be on everyone's mind in the Church of England right now, kind of the idea of trust and confidence. How much does the presence or absence of these two qualities of trust and confidence in your deanery synod, your DLT, your deanery leadership team, how much does that impact your ability to have good discussions and to maintain good relationships? I mentioned a few ideas. I loved some of the ones in the chat. Great. I think someone mentioned Anna chaplaincy, having a conversation and finding out you all had a shared interest in beekeeping was great. Some of the ones that we've done or that I've heard about from other deaneries, stand and offering prayer together at a local event, so like a local festival or some sort of farmers market and sharing out the rota. holding a deanery event together, somewhere visible outside, a picnic, a jamboree, and just letting your church families mingle and get to know one another a bit. And the holiday club in our deanery that we did, so multiple churches got together and just over the course of a week did a holiday club with lunch. We fed all the children that came, particularly thinking about the cost of living crisis. And one of my favourite projects that we've done in our deanery is we've planned a passion trail. We've done it several years in a row. So it's something that moves from church to church over one Saturday before Easter. Different churches across the deanery set up different stations of the cross effectively with activities. Things that go down really well with kids. I think one year my kids on their cargo bike managed to go around nearly every church in the deanery. It was a bit crazy. We became a bit infamous. And then it finished with a service for us at St John's Waterloo because that was really accessible. But it was a lovely chance to see inside everyone else's churches, to learn a bit about them, do the Passion Trail together, and to see lots of different people from all across the deanery, kind of in their home patch, and then come together at one church at the end for a short service. And a few more suggestions just to reflect on when you're in groups. Deanery champions are increasingly a thing, certainly where we are, for different areas of ministry. But also you could think about organising some sort of deanery pilgrimage for something to do together, or women's events, giving somewhere together, supporting a church or a charity somewhere else in the world so that you've got something shared. Running a simple discipleship course or a book club as a deanery, which could be online or in person, but again gives you an actual reason to be talking to people and getting to know them. I think we're going to move to breakouts now, which I think Tim is going to set up for us. But there were two questions I would love you to think about as you go into groups. See, what is the characteristic that you would most want to see in a deanery that was working well? And secondly, what would be your top tip to share with a group to improve the status and or effectiveness of the deanery?
Thank you all. Welcome back. We'll find Bex in a minute, wherever she is.
Hello,
Oh, there's
I am
Bex.
still here.
Yeah.
Can you still see my screen successfully, Martin? Is that all still working?
Yes. No, your screen. Well, no, not your sharing screen, but you're on the screen.
I'm on the screen. Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. I might want to just pop back to the main window and do screen sharing again then. Thank you all very much for that. Hopefully that felt like some positive conversation. It'd be really lovely just to hear a little bit from each group about what you chatted about, what you thought was working well, what you thought maybe wasn't working quite so well, or what could be even better. Let me just pop my screen back up. So I think there was a slide for this hidden away somewhere. There's always a slide for everything. There we go.
That's posh. Okay. Group one.
Bex, do you want to take the groups in turn? Or
Yes, that would be lovely. Let's start with someone from group one, if that's okay.
group one is your group, Bex. So yourself, Esme, Howard, Robert, Wendy.
We've definitely heard enough of me, but if someone else would be willing to chat about it, that would be lovely.
Okay, Howard is unmuted on that. We had an interesting discussion really on alignment of boundaries and the challenges that are being faced by compression of parishes within deaneries and the creation of super deanery with extremely large numbers of parishes which really make them unwieldy. There seems to be a sort of working size of between 12 to 20, which allows people to talk to each other and build their own plans. In Surrey Heath, we've got 13 parishes now, well, 12 and one about to be created, and they've been able to build together a common plan which underpins their individual church development plans. But the challenge seems to be that in certain areas, the lack of clergy and the attempt to bring parishes together are really generating an unmanageable situation. There is a good opportunity here for deanery, but we need to fight back against the creation of structures that are actually too large to be sensibly manageable. In business terms, normally if you've got one manager, you've got eight reports is about the maximum. So maybe we can stretch that a bit, but we do need to ensure that the deanery structure survives in a way when that will actually work. Is that a reasonable summary, Bex?
I think that was a reasonable summary. Thanks very much, Howard. That's great. It was quite a fighty discussion, but it was very interesting to have. Room 2, perhaps someone from your group could share with us next. So that was Andrew, Anne, Glenn, Ian,
Jim, John, Linda.
We didn't get beyond the first question, really. We had completely opposing views from two members. So where I'm from, clergy have reduced to almost quorum level over the past 10 years, and the lay have increased. And Brian found exactly the opposite situation in his deanery. So
That's really interesting. And are you in very different kinds of deaneries, one urban, one rural, or is that just different dioceses? Forgive me, you might not know. I'm just curious.
Sorry, well, I'm in Milton Keynes, and I think Brian is in near Chester. I don't know if he'd like to speak up and say if he's rural or not.
It's actually Ian who's in Chester diocese.
Oh, it's Ian. Oh,
yes,
okay.
we are probably a mix of urban and rural, probably more urban than rural, but we are a very elongated deanery. But I think one of the concerns I expressed was that we have 16 lay members, which is a 43% take up of entitlements. Part of the reason for that, I suspect, is a lack of interest in our parishes of Deanery Synod, and we're an elderly Deanery Synod lay membership as well. When we meet, I would say very few of the clergy attend. That's another, which is a symptom, I suppose, of what I've just said. We are topic based, and so what Tug had to say was, whilst I understand the governance aspect, just know motions don't go up or down or sideways, because we just don't have that side to our Deanery Synod, which is a frustration, really. But in fact, that was a question I had. Is that a national experience, or rather a flood of motions going up to General Synod eventually from Deanery? Certainly not my experience.
I'm not sure. Thanks, Ian. Thank you both. I'm not sure I describe it as a flood. I would say, yeah, we do have them occasionally at General Synod, and it's lovely to see them when they land, and then to get the chance to chat with people who've put them forward and learn a little bit about how each motion has got to where it's got to from the deanery to the diocese and then on up, and how the supporters have done that and who's kind of contributed, I guess. But it's definitely not a flood. Thank you both very much. Group three, I think, was next, which was.
I'm still on group two. Could I just pop in and offer just half a thought?
Sure, Ian. Okay.
Thank you very much. We had a bit of a discussion where I was highlighting what's happening in Portsmouth Diocese, which we have a new bishop a couple of years ago, and a colleague discussing in Hastings, in Chichester Diocese, and completely opposite ways of doing things. In Portsmouth now, our deaneries are absolutely front and centre of the diocesan plan. And a lot of pressure is being put on the deaneries by the bishop to come out with plans which they want to implement. So the communication up and down the line is, I think, what is holding us together. And this apparently is what is not happening as far as Hastings is concerned. Here you could feel the kind of disorientation, almost, the disinterest that we're having elsewhere. We turned a corner in Portsmouth. I'm quite convinced of it. If you go back 5 years ago, there was no communication anywhere. And it was a very, very frustrating experience. That is not what we see now. And I think the secret of this is to have the bishop and his top management team taking the deaneries seriously, asking questions, demanding answers, and giving them the resources to carry out what they want to do.
Amen to that.
I'll just come in that this is Andrew from Hastings. We don't actually have any real communication between the deanery and the diocese. We get asked to do deanery plans, but you do them, they go up, and that's the last you hear. So there is a lot of, I think, disenchantment, but again, it's still, we're an elongated diocese, so Chichester is at the far west, Hastings and Rye are at the far east. So of course it's a good few hours to travel from one to the other, and it's just bridging that gap between where to have meetings. For instance, I think a good example is for this coming year, we're having youth pilgrimages, initially starting at one end of the diocese going to the other, whereas in fact it's mainly over in the west, which only comes as far as Eastbourne, which of course is a reasonable way from Hastings. So again, the general feeling in Hastings is we've forgotten again. So it's trying to get that we are still part of the diocese. Please remember that we're here. And we're always told that we do remember, but I think that's it. So people do get disheartened. They don't want to turn up to synod meeting. I can't really blame them.
Yeah, that does sound very disheartening, Andrew. Was there anyone else? You were group 3, is that right? Or are we still group 2? Forgive me.
Well, yeah, that was group. We've had 2 groups. I think we're on to group 3, which is Andrew, Georgie, Joyce, Rosemary, and Simon.
Yeah, that's me feeding back. If you can hear me, we thought the things we would like to see if a deanery was working well was that it was collaborative, that it wasn't dominated by one person, and that it had decided its priorities for each 3-year term, so that rather than trying to do everything, it had decided it was going to do 1 or 2 things and get those done. And the top tip for effectiveness actually came up from 2 people, was about investing in the relationships within synod. So 2 people said they either the first meeting of each 3-year term was deliberately almost getting to know people, having conversations in small groups, and the other said each year one of their meetings was a lunch meeting, I think it was, or a dinner meeting, where people sat down at tables of 6 or 8 and talked through the agenda in a small group. So they're getting to know each other much better, and that investment in relationships pays off big time in terms of the effectiveness of the synod across its 3-year term. So I think that was a feedback.
Thank you, Simon. That's really helpful. Yeah, I also really enjoy it when we have a meal together in our deanery. Group 4, I think we're next. So that's Ali, Jeffrey, Lorena, Sherry, Susan, or Tom.
So we didn't really get to the question. Sorry, it's Lorena speaking. It seemed to be a common theme that diocesan plans appear. We had one extensively in Lichfield, and that seems to be an iterative process. So information does go up and does come down again. I would question some of the buy-in wholly by the whole of the deanery synod, but certainly it's there. One of our members brought up the fact that one of the benefits is in Hudnett, for example, is actually the size of some people's deaneries. So, I mean, it's not 51. Lady from Rydale, West Rydale, 51 churches in her deanery, which includes like moors and things. So they're not having deanery days, because that's quite an enterprise. But yeah, it seemed to be that the plans, the sort of idea of having plans, is what was holding the deaneries together, giving them a sort of purpose and a structure. Yeah, that was kind of where we got really. Somebody did mention the late diocesan lay chairs getting together, Tug. I don't know if that happens in Lichfield, where all the diocesan lay chairs deanery lay chairs get together 4 times a year, and that seems to work well for them. I've only been in job about a month.
Thanks very much, Lorena. I can't speak for Tug, but yeah, we do that in Southwark as well. And it's just nice to get to know other lay chairs. But interesting that your group also was reflecting on the size and scale of deaneries and how that might be changing, and how what they can therefore get done or do or maybe even be is changing. Group 5 was next. That was, I think, Brian, Linda, Ian, and Bishop Alistair. Although I think we might have skipped around a bit, because have we already heard from Ian?
You have heard from us already, I think, probably Bex.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Group 6 was next then. So that's Brian, Douglas, Elizabeth, Pam, Samantha, or Sarah.
If I may, we didn't actually get to the questions as such, because we were just really reviewing what didn't seem to be going very well in most cases, with the exception of Douglas, who may want to say something about how well his arrangement works. But we were mostly regretting the difficulties of getting people to commit and to build relationships. And it did seem to come down very largely to time, people not having time.
I think my contribution was slightly different in Birmingham, because I think we've got this system where we've got full-time area deans, as Manchester has, and I was saying that has been of much help, in the sense that because we are full-time area deans, we've been able to sort of commit some time to really getting to know the clergy and to know the deanery, and as such, the working has been slightly better, in that sense. In the sense that, I mean, we've developed relationships with clergy, we have developed relationships with lay chairs, and as such, we're able to sort of put together sort of an agenda that is much more interesting, and as such, there's been some buy-in. And that was the difference. How long that is going to carry on, I'm not sure, but that has been the difference.
Thank you both very much. For what it's worth, I think it's also good to be sharing what's not working as well as what is working, if only so that you know that you're not alone. I have what I would call good synods and bad synods, and sometimes I look at the attendance and want to cry. But then other ones are really good. Group 7, I think you were next. Was that Andrew, Carol, George, Jacqueline, and Martin?
Go, George.
We're all going to wait for the other. I think my main recollection is lack of communication, lack of trust. Things happened. Sometimes you get treated like mushrooms, kept in the dark, and we won't go on with the rest of that expression, but it happened. But my take on it, not necessarily the views of the others, is as a deanery, you can get on and do stuff yourself. You can occupy the space. So we do lots of things, lots of trainings, local face-to-face trainings, all sorts of things. We do that because we can. We don't need permission to do that. I wouldn't ask anyway. We just do it. And the other problem we have is Deanery is not a legal entity, so we can't employ people. But my solution to that is form a company. So we're going to form a company so that we can employ people and move on.
That sounds really creative, fascinating. We might have to come back to you just to hear more about how that's going on another evening, George, potentially.
Just before you move on, Bex, George, it'd be very interesting because I've actually written, if you go onto the NDN website and under the resources, you'll find there's a couple of booklets which I wrote about employing people.
That would be good because we need all the information we can get, so that's fine.
Do come back to me if you want some more help because we've done extensive work on it.
But I think my simple message is occupy the space. If you don't occupy the space, people won't take any notice of you and they'll ignore you and they'll walk over you. Occupy the space.
Okay.
Thank you very much, George. As we come towards the end, room 8 was, I think, Catherine, Father David, Kerry, Lynn, Marilyn, and Richard, if one of you is happy to share.
I made a few notes, if that helps.
That's great.
We kind of focused on the first question, but I guess some of the things that we thought were characteristics of good deaneries would be top tips, I suppose. We thought that anything that gives a shared purpose, something that you can tangibly work on together, of some sort of project, tends to bring people together. We saw that deaneries that demonstrate generosity of spirit is a really good thing, particularly if you can sort of do that between churches that are perhaps a very different tradition. And then that spun us off into a discussion about deaneries that have had a really difficult, torrid time, perhaps recently, with LLF. Some deaneries have sort of buried their heads in the sand about it, but other deaneries have been forced to confront it in a way because some benefices have left, form their own sort of deanery, and we were sort of starting to wonder what role the deanery could have or should have in holding us together at a local level and being a place of unity. We talked about the benefits of having non-clergy meetings and for the lay be able to get together and discuss things without us, whereas some of us were struggling to get lay chairs, and I was glad to find I wasn't alone in that, having just got one, but it's been a long struggle to get people to generally to fill some of the roles for the deanery. I don't know if anybody else in the group wants to add anything to that.
I'd just say that it was really good to hear that one of the good ways of promoting good work and good best practice within a deanery might be to start with having good relationships with one another. So, begin a new term of office or a new triennium or something with a really good get together to get to know one another, so that you hear, you listen to one another, and you value one another.
Thanks very much, guys. And finally, the last group, which was group 9. So I think, forgive me, were you? No, you weren't group 9. No, group 9 is to go. And then I think that's everyone, which was Barnaby, David, Elizabeth, Kerry, and Susan.
I'm happy to start as something others add in. Was it really good to talk about how deaneries, I probably didn't actually follow the question, so bear with me. Talk about sharing good practice amongst the parishes, having opportunities for building. I agree with a bit about the relationships, getting to know people in the deanery. One of the challenges I've found being new, but being part of the church and PCCs and deanery synod before, but as lay chair, is I don't envy the people with 41 parishes across the moors. I mean, ours isn't quite that bad in rural Surrey, but building relationships across distance is quite difficult. And also the fact that Deanery Synod reps coming from a PCC, and that balance between the importance of parish and the benefit of deanery. And when somebody in Deanery Synod said to me, well, I came because nobody else would do the job, I didn't get this sense of urgent commitment to collaboration. Let's put it that way. Okay. So I think, there's something about working with people and findings. So it's really good to hear about other people. And I think that bit about sharing good practice across parishes, but we've got to get them to feed back to PCCs. We've got to get PCCs to feed into Deanery. So that was my observations, but others in the group might want to add something.
If no one else has anything from that group, then I think probably we move on. Thank you all ever so much for what you shared. It's been really interesting to hear about the highs, the lows, best practice, things that have been really frustrating. Yeah, so I'm just, thank you for all you shared. Thank you for coming this evening. Please do stay in touch. We've got contact information, probably Tug's. And I know Tug's referred to a number of resources that will be on the website that you can go hunting for. And if you've got any ideas for things that you think it would be great to do a session on in the future, do drop us a line, because it's good to do stuff that's useful. It's great to know what the needs are. And I wonder if, Bishop Alistair, I might ask you to pray for us as we close, please.
Yeah, thanks ever so much to Bex and to Tug for putting our events together tonight and helping steer us through some of those things. And thanks to everyone who's participated tonight as well, because actually your involvement, Deanery by Deanery, is actually partly what helps build the structures that helps the Church of England tick over. It is really important and it's really valuable. So thank you very much for that. But as it's late, let's just have a short prayer and ask for God's blessing on each of us, shall we? Go before us, Lord, in all our doings, with your most gracious favour, and further us with your continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in you, we may glorify your holy name, and finally by your mercy attain everlasting life. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you, all those that you love and pray for tonight and always. Amen.
Brilliant.
Thank you all very much indeed. It's been lovely having you this evening. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.